Welcome to this discussion concerning monitoring of contemporary care in acute coronary syndromes in Europe. And we will discuss the results of the EuroHeart interactive platform. EuroHeart has gone from a vision to reality that we have presented at this Congress. And I am Lars Valentin. I am the chairman of the EuroHeart project that I have been co-chairing with Professor Barbara Cassidy from nowadays Imperial College in London, head of the Heart and Lung Institute, I think that is.
Correct.
So, and we have been co-chairing the project. And I then have in the next seat Professor David Erlinger from Lund in Sweden, who has been chairing the SwedeHeart PCI registry for many years, and now is the leader of the PCI and ACS domain in EuroHeart. And Eva Prescott from Copenhagen, Denmark, professor of medicine and nowadays the deputy chair of the EuroHeart project, previously working a lot on different registries and trials in Denmark. And finally, Professor Mamas from Kiel, who is the leader of the English PCI registry, and who is also had delivered, I must say, most of the data in the current report. And we have just reviewed this at this meeting, and let's see if I can move forward to the next slide. So this shows you the EuroHeart concept. EuroHeart has a mission to develop and maintain an international collaboration that provides general availability to systems for continuous online registration of high quality and harmonized data, both at entry and over time, and which can provide real-time information to the healthcare providers to improve quality of care and monitor quality of care. And then our aim is, of course, also to use this infrastructure of collaborating countries for research projects. We have been active over the last 3 years, and countries have delivered aggregated data, as you can see, on large numbers of patients. And 2024 is really the top year. We now have 13 countries, almost half of Europe, as you can see on the slide, delivering data on 170,000 patients of ACS and PCI, 63,000 STEMIs, and 110,000 non-STEMI patients. So this is an important data set where we can learn a lot about quality of care and also compare countries in our reports. But before the discussion, I'd like to highlight that at this stage we have a lot of differences, not only in quality of care between the countries, but also in the country cohorts that we are comparing. We have almost complete coverage of patients from England, Wales, as you can see, and from Hungary and Norway and Sweden. And from some countries like France, we have large cohorts, but focusing on a specifically treated group, which is the PCI-treated patients. From many other countries, we have smaller cohorts, and when we compare and draw conclusions from these data, we need a lot of caution. So I'd like to start the discussion, Barbara, that, I mean, now when we sit here in 2025, how did we really succeed in going from this vision that I think you put forward when you was the president between 2017 even and 18, and how did we reach this reality success?
Quite simply, we asked SwedeHeart to help. and so there was already history. Why reinventing the wheel where we have models already available in Europe? And the idea that the effort has been to expand that model and to other countries. We knew what the limitation of the EuroHeart now grasp registries were, and we wanted to overcome them. And so in that plus a lot of determination, I think, that was needed, got us to this point. And the collaboration, of course, of people that incrementally became more and more enthusiastic as the project grew to join the project as well, and to have an idea not only about what happens in their country, but across Europe and multiple geographies. So I think I can only see positivity. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I cannot see anything possibly wrong or indeed limiting by having an initiative such as this. I'm very proud of it.
I think, David, when we started this project, I turned to the EuroHeart steering committee and asked, would you like to be involved in this project? Because, of course, if you deliver your data somewhere else, you might lose some of your independence. So what do you think? I mean, the response was obviously positive. What did people think about?
Yes, I mean, in the beginning there were some questions, and of course, will they go into a black hole at EC and someone else will write papers with our data? And at that time we were also rather dominant in numbers of patients and so on. But we soon realized that this will be a really good collaboration, and the principles that each country own their own data.
Yes.
They have the individual data set for themselves and only send the aggregated data to a common database, makes you safer in that you will keep your own data. But as always, the more you get to know the people you work with, the more safer you feel, and
Exactly.
the more you learn about the project, the better it feels. So there's no question about it. It's a perfect thing.
And Mamas, what do you think? I mean, you are delivering the absolutely largest cohort, and without you it wouldn't have been 170,000 patients, rather down to 70,000. So therefore, but there were some obstacles on the road.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a fantastic opportunity across Europe, really, to compare how we're doing and make comparisons across Europe, because you can only really assess your performance when you compare to something else. I think the next step that we've all been talking about is unification of the data sets, trying to collect the same pieces of information across the whole of Europe to make comparisons much more easily. And it really goes back to what David said earlier. Once you start to collaborate, you can then develop more meaningful collaborations. So, for example, myself and David had worked very closely recently trying to publish comparative data from the UK heart attack registry and from EuroHeart, and validating some of our risk scores. So, you know, I see this as a great positive.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the strengths of EuroHeart, beyond that all hospitals participate, it is also the Swedish registry system where you can get automatic follow-up. And I think you have this. What do you think about this, Eva? You have worked, you are an epidemiologist, and you have worked with this type of data in Denmark. I mean, what do you see as strengths and weaknesses in the type of data we have in EuroHeart?
Well, first of all, I'm a little humbled to be sitting here because I'm completely new and I haven't followed the work and I haven't, you know, contributed to the data as all of you have. But of course, I'm happy to discuss that. I think what our experience from Denmark is we have also good registries, and our experience is that they have lifted the hospitals that were falling back, perhaps, or they have benchmarked our hospitals against each other, and it's been a huge incentive for everybody to become better when you monitor these quality indicators. And I think you know, basics of this collaboration, the EuroHeart, is also to do the same on an international level. I think the hope would be that we also benchmark against each other and see what can we do better. And already now, from the data that you have gathered, there are some issues probably that you can look at, you know, differences in timing. I'm sure we're going to come back to that. But I think the whole aim of it also, when your vision was that this is going to be used to lift care across Europe, in addition to having amazing data to do research into.
When we see the data, I mean, and see the different cohorts, we are trying to be very cautious in comparing outcomes because the cohorts are different. But we see some patterns, and it is like the risk factors are not that different. I mean, it turns out that age, of course, but also smoking and hypertension comes out. I think, what do you think about the risk factors, smoking in Europe? It's different in different countries, obviously.
Yeah, well, and it's always higher in those that get the myocardial infarctions because it's such a strong risk factor, and particularly in the young. So it doesn't necessarily reflect, well, to some extent it does reflect the smoking rates in the countries, which we know unfortunately are not going down as fast as we would like them to.
And the same with hypertension and diabetes seems to be different.
Yeah.
I mean, we obviously expose sex issues, and there are differences between the sexes. Is this changing in some way, or is it the same? Or
I think the data confirm what we mostly have been finding, that women get their myocardial infarctions, whether it's STEMI or non-STEMI, at an old age. And because of that, they also have more comorbidity when they get their infarctions. And because of that, well, we at least you can see that the women have a poorer prognosis after their myocardial infarctions. Whether or not that's completely driven by age, we don't know, but something definitely that could be looked into. And also there seems to be a difference in the number of patients who are revascularized and so on. But what explains these differences is something that the EuroHeart could also be able to help explain. And why the levels are different. The patterns are the same, I think, across the countries, but the levels are different. And what explains those differences? Really interesting to look into.
I thought when I saw the treatment data that there were smaller differences in treatment than I imagined, which I think is good. I mean, it seems the only treatment that was slightly lower used in women was PCI, as a matter of fact, but it might very well depend on the lesions you see as coronary angiograms, and we need to look into that. But that was kind of a positive surprise to me. So maybe the sex differences have been decreased over the years. So what do you think, Barbara?
I also noticed that statins were prescribed slightly less often, and that really surprised me because it's a very well established secondary prevention in particular, and so that I cannot easily explain as to why, and it's consistent across the countries. So that it's a little bit surprising. I mean, we're talking about publishing paper and getting this out and everything, but if we could, through EuroHeart, have an influence of quality of care, and to say, because of this, because we have discussed this together, now our figures have changed that much, that for me would be, I would retire happily.
You'll never retire.
No, but it would make such an impact. I mean, for me, this is really so much more than writing paper.
But I think the quality is very, very high. We have the kind of medical treatments according to guidelines. Most of those are measured, and we really see that all countries are P2Y12 inhibitors close to 100%, and so on and on. The interesting thing is the new medications, or rather new, SGLT2, ezetimibe, GLP-1, and so on. There we still have very low usage rates. And the new thing with this year's report is that we also have 3-year data. And the positive thing is that we can see a trend that they are increasing, even if they're still too low, I would say.
And what about an invasive treatment? I don't know, myself, if you've seen the data, but it looks very favorable
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's really important to capture this both through the EuroHeart programme, but also the EAPCI Atlas as well, again, supported by the ESC. And we've had that presented and published simultaneously during this Congress as well. And as you say, I think we're showing adoption of evidence-based practice in that rates of primary PCI are very high, very uniform. And STEMI, there is some more variation amongst countries, but I still think it falls within what I would say would be acceptable levels. Adoption of the radial approach, over 90%, a class 1A indication. And then going from the ESC, EAPCI Atlas, use of intravascular imaging. I mean, there we report 24-25% of cases on average, but again, much wider variation across Europe. So I think it's very positive, but certainly shows us also areas where perhaps we can target.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems we have come beyond the level of getting basic treatments.
Yes.
I mean, all of this has been developed since the 1980s and 90s, but now, what should we do to move forward further in the invasive environment? Where do you think, what should be the next steps?
So I think there's several areas. I think the first and foremost is actually prevention. I mean, that's probably the most important part. I'm an interventional cardiologist. I don't want to go in hospital at 3 a.m. in the morning doing primary PCI. I'd rather have good and aggressive prevention. I think in relation to PCI, then clearly thinking about optimal antiplatelet regime and durations, thinking about bystander disease, how best to treat it, and are we really treating the most appropriate lesions. And finally, very aggressive risk factor control. We're seeing some really nice data coming from this meeting about what we do with patients post-AMI. So I think those are 3 areas that I think we really need to focus around.
And I think, I mean, there are obvious learning experiences that in some countries we seem to have much higher rates of smoking and hypertension and diabetes, and these can be learning experiences. And in some countries we have pretty low, but could obviously be better on an individual patient basis.
And I'd also like to congratulate the team in bringing across Singapore. I think some of their data is really quite fascinating, and I think it's really nice to have that comparator. And I would certainly encourage the team if we can bring other countries to join the registry, such as Singapore, perhaps China, some of the other countries in the region. I think it would be very powerful for us, particularly when we have many of these sorts of patients in a multicultural society that we treat day to day.
Yes.
And we have in the registry, I mean, we have at least both Eastern Europe and Western Europe, Southern and Northern. And as we know, there are higher event rates and mortality in the Eastern European countries. And it comes out maybe mainly being caused by, as you say, risk factors, while the treatments are rather similar overall. So a focus on primary and secondary prevention seems to be a key. What do you as an interventionalist, David, see as are the next steps concerning improving interventions? I mean, cardiologists are always focused on these procedures performed over 2 hours and think that we should change the natural course of the disease.
No, there are some areas that I've been engaged in, and one is, of course, those vulnerable plaques that will cause a myocardial infarction, even if they are not flow limiting. You might even not see them on the angiogram, or just as a little bump in the road. And we know that very well now from 10 studies that they are there and they cause infarctions. And we know how to find them. Now the question is how to treatment. And that could be different things. It could be, there are studies on drug-coated balloons, there's studies with stents, and so on. But probably in the future there will be these syringes with siRNA that can take away any apolipoprotein in your liver, and then you will not have any lipids in your circulation, and then we all have to retire, I would guess.
Wonderful.
And we have a longevity syndrome or something.
Yeah.
Who knows? So do you think, what do you think then? I mean, we have, obviously, this is a hypothesis concerning LP(a), but how can a system like EuroHeart be used scientifically? I mean, would you start this, Barbara, because this is...
Yeah, that is the other, the first kind of big dream that I had was the changing quality, using this, weaponizing to some extent the results of the registry to give the national cardiologist a tool to go to the politicians and say, we are not doing as well as the Czech Republic, so we need to do better and identifying the risk factors and the way to do better. The second big dream was to actually have an infrastructure for randomized controlled trials. If not totally within registries and platforms, at least to have a network in Europe that was in the hands of us, where we could recruit a decent number of women, because the problem is the enriching, to have enough patients so that we can enrich, because we know that even the acceptance rate of women to invitation to take part to clinical trials in ischemic heart disease is lower. And so, we need to invite more women, and so we need to have more women in the list. So that was one aim, and the other aim is to, try new drugs. I think that the lipoprotein(a) is interesting but challenging because the distribution is extremely skewed, and so, we need to find. It's not it's not the same as giving a statin, where you say you lower your LDL cholesterol wherever the LDL cholesterol is, you get a benefit. There, I think you really need to identify the patient. So it's one extra step.
Another aim that I think we discussed at the start, it was safety surveillance, because we could provide do you like some... What do you think, Mamas? Could we do safety surveillance of new drugs and devices in this type of a system, or would it be require too much granular detail?
No, I do think you can measure safety. I mean, to give you one example, just using UK data, we noticed a safety signal around inter-hospital transfers and receipt of primary PCI, and that changed national policy. Just something simple, just noticing this data through registries. So absolutely, we can do that. And the FDA have data sets, such as the FDA MORD data set that captures events associated with devices. And certainly there's been changes in, for example, stent design based on analyses of the FDA MORD data set. And so I see no reason why we can't see that, and monitoring longer term outcomes, particularly outside of the ACS setting when TAVR valves, SAVR valves are being implanted. I think it's very important to have this information and longer term follow-up.
I think one interesting thing that we discussed with the company today was they're doing the big studies, but when the study is done, what if we took the profile of their patients and compared it to the EuroHeart profile? And then we could see where are the gaps, what subgroups are not into their big studies. And then we could use the EuroHeart to study those, maybe randomized trials, maybe something. That is important to know the reality.
You mean the recruitment of specific subgroups for testing?
So we can look, what subgroups did they miss? And then we can find them. Because we have such a large data set. So even if we just need 1,000 patients, when we have 173,000 myocardial infarctions each year, even if it's a very small subgroup, we can find it very easy.
But also, if you think about it, most of the trials are undertaken in big academic university hospital settings, and so we really don't know whether the treatment effect that we find in randomized trials is replicated in the real world. And so I think that's the beauty of this sort of EuroHeart registry, in that we can look at either interventions, we can look at outcomes and see how they compare and whether there's a difference amongst countries.
Yeah.
It's always interesting when you have a newly approved drug, because it takes approximately 8-9 years before you go from 0 to 90% or something like that. It's always like that.
Yeah.
And then when you're in mid of this, then you can study it in registers, because then you have 50% treated and 50% non-treated, and then you can compare how does it go for the patients.
Yeah. Now, I also like the idea. I know not all the countries can do that, but there are countries like in the UK, for example, and in Sweden, where you can link to your national insurance, to your NHS number, essentially, and you can do passive follow-up until forever, until the patient dies. And I think that highlights within a trial, the long-term effects, the long-term advantage. I remember the reason why I got really interested in this was a report of the WASCOPs, because in the original WASCOPs there was no signal on heart failure, but then 10 years or 15 years later you could see that those patients who had been randomized to statin had a lower incidence of heart failure. So I think most of the benefit, not just the safety, but the benefit are actually becoming clearer over the long term. And so, even that added to, at least for the countries that can do that, would add a lot of information.
What do you think, Eva? How could we gradually transform the EuroHeart registries to have the same quality for epidemiological analysis as you have in Denmark? What is needed?
Well, I was just going to say to follow up on what Barbara said, that some of our countries also have linkage to registries and medication, so we can also follow up on what adherence to medication is, which is also really important and driving mortality and so on, and all of the socioeconomic
this is what you have in Denmark. I mean, you are so successful in publishing early data concerning medications relations to outcomes.
But you have that data in the UK
in
also?
England and Sweden.
Capture that data, and you have it also.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
I mean, together we can get very big pictures of that.
Yeah, and but could we get there with the EuroHeart collaboration, or do we need to focus then on a few countries like England, Denmark, Sweden, Norway?
That's a good question. On one hand, Sweden and Denmark and Norway and the UK are probably already doing very well because they have their own national registries and so on. So if the aim, and the aim is to improve care in all of Europe, maybe we should focus more, but this is open for discussion, focus more on getting more countries on board and making sure that what we're doing now is very good, rather than perfecting it in these Northern European countries that already have the registries and so on. But of course that's open to discussion how you should prioritize.
Yeah, no. If you like to have sort out granular details, you need the more detailed information. And
I guess one of the areas that we haven't talked about is the special populations, and I think this is, we talk about randomized trials being the panacea of evidence, but for example, the cancer population, there is no randomized trial in heart attack care in the cancer population. I think these sorts of registries are really useful in understanding the quality care and clinical outcomes. And we've done some of the work with the Sweetheart registry in David, looking at outcomes of these patients following ACS, and it's something that we can really leverage the power of the EuroHeart surveys in trying to understand disparities in care in these sorts of special population types.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know if we have questions from the audience. There is a possibility to come up with questions from your side if you like to contribute.
we can't see anything. We can't see you.
It's the lights.
So I don't see that.
They're speechless. You've left them astounded, Lars.
We obviously.
Yeah.
So concerning, I mean, obviously we think about the clinical trials. David, you have done registry-based clinical trials, and also can you comment on the opportunities in the system? We have not presented this today, but it is a vision.
Yes, absolutely. It's the sheer number of patients makes the opportunity much better. And the advantages with using a register as a base for trial is that you can find the patients through the register. You can plan the study by looking at the population, and you know how many there are of each sort. And then you can use the background information. You don't have to fill in a CRF and so on. You just have it there. The only thing you need is one randomization. And then you have the follow-up in the register. And this, as we have used and you have done in Denmark, and we have collaborated with UK, it can, if you do a very, very simple trial, just a device for 10 minutes, like thrombus aspiration, and only mortality as endpoint, then it's very simple and very cheap. And the cost is kind of 100,000 of a pharma trial. If you make it more complicated, you have a drug, short-term drug, then you need approvals and so on, and need more safety, maybe some phone calls, and then you can go all the way up to a really complicated trial, like we did the DAPA-MI trial with the UK. So there are so many opportunities, but the good thing is that you have the patients, and the register facilitates doing really large and cheap trials.
Yeah, and we need a lot of those because, I mean, the industry is not interested in all these questions. For example, today there was a hotline presenting, testing the duration of antiplatelet treatment after MI. How long should you keep dual treatment, and could you switch to single treatment alone after 3 months? And as should before, you can, of course. And so therefore, I mean, there are many of those duration issues, combination issues that are difficult to answer, but maybe easy to design. I mean, we saw in our data from EuroHeart concerning the P2Y12 inhibitors, there are 3 of those, ticagrelor, prasugrel, and clopidogrel. And the evidence are under discussion, which is the best one, and is the risk worth the benefit, etc. And we saw a large variability. Some countries use still only clopidogrel, and other countries dominating ticagrelor.
Excuse me.
So this might be, do you think, a randomized trial there, or?
That is, especially if you just limit it to duration, you're not comparing placebo or anything like that, then it's easier to do. But I can mention this, to start this RRCT in EuroHeart, Stefan James and Gaurav Batra is leading fast non-STEMI, comparing very early PCI for non-STEMI patients or delayed more than 24 hours at least. And the reason they chose this design for the first study in EuroHeart is because there is no pharma, it's very simple. You don't have to go to the EMEA for approval and so on. So it's kind of the simplest form of trial you can do in the register. But we think that by doing that and learning from that, then we can do more complex trials.
Yeah. Cluster randomization, Eva, do you believe in that?
But that would be fantastic. Of course, cluster randomization, there are problems with cluster randomization. You need to really adhere to the cluster that you're in. But that could be done. We have trials in Denmark which are entirely registry-driven, You don't need to have the individual patient consent. It's each hospital gives the medication according to the randomized which cluster they're randomized to, and all the follow-up is through registries. Of course, as I said, there's a lot of weaknesses in cluster randomization, but that's something that you can do across these large registries. Of course, also limited what type of intervention you can have and so on. But we just had this, Sweden have done the same. We did these trials of whether you should be giving beta blockers after myocardial infarction, also something that the industry have no interest in, and that need to be cheap, because if it's investigator driven, it has to be cheap. And in the future, you can see this EuroHeart network conducting these trials, and hopefully also reaching a lot of patients that are not reached in other trials, because it's based on the registries as you do in Sweden.
And we have had this discussion that when a new treatment is initiated, we know that we will have that those go first and those go last and so on. So we will have a spreading all the time. And that's actually a perfect opportunity to use cluster randomization, because if you just make a decision, we will randomize the order that the different areas go. Then you will have a perfect 50-50 at the end of 2 years or something like that, or 3 years.
It's also cost. I mean, that's the key driver. I mean, in the current economic climate, pharma don't want to invest large amounts of money. And we know, say, for example, the SAFE trial in women from the NCDR registry a few years ago, PI Sunil Rao, the cost of that trial was 1/10, because it was delivered through the NCDR registry, what it would have been had we gone through a conventional approach. So I think it's this is an opportunity to deliver cost-effective trials at a volume that you simply cannot achieve through traditional approaches and metrics.
Still, I don't see any urgent questions from the audience. Well, if not, I think actually we can conclude the session, don't you think? We have had a lot of good discussion around EuroHeart, and we have been allowed to tell about our previous vision and our future vision. And maybe I could end by showing the conclusion slides we were presenting at the late-breaking clinical registry session. So we think now that the EuroHeart collaboration provides internationally standardized data and allows continuous monitoring and comparison of quality of care within and between participating hospitals in countries. And we are now covering around half of Europe. The result from the 3 years documents and certifies that generally high standards of care are really used in all participating countries, and there is a great adherence to the ESC guidelines in patients with acute coronary syndrome. And the statistical reporting highlights areas of improvement which are good to identify, and we have really areas of improvement both concerning quality of care and quality of registration. And these are used for further development in the different countries. And now we also plan to do more sophisticated analysis in the system, and being able to use individual data by developing federated data analysis. And finally, I think that we will even be continuing to provide large numbers of patients, and these might be eligible for inclusion in trials, and we plan to launch registry-based randomized clinical trials in the setting of EuroHeart. Hope that your country is interested to join, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you.